Now, some of us may not be aware that more and more Americans are learning and studying various African languages. Now, if we are not careful, at some future date, maybe in the distant future, they will come and teach us our languages.
The brightness of this day has given me the opportunity to bring you this video. Welcome back to my channel, Winging It with AC. My name is AC. Today, we have Daddy of Life over here with us. So finally, a few weeks ago on one of my live videos, I promised that I was going to do a video with my dad to talk about languages, why it's important for us to speak our local languages with our children. Now, the reason why I brought him is because he's a professor of linguistics and former pro-vice chancellor of the University of Ghana. So, Daddy, you are very welcome to Winging It with AC.
Thank you.
And a very avid supporter of this channel. He watches all my videos and gives me feedback as and when necessary. So, Daddy, once again, you are welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to give us a short introduction of yourself, or my introduction is enough?
Oh, what you've said is enough. What else is there to say? I've been doing linguistics in my life, I don't know for how many years now. Before you were born, anyway. So that's all we need to know.
So as we go on with this conversation, I will share. I really remember one incident when it comes to speaking. Him speaking fancy with us and making sure that we spoke fancy when we were growing up. So, Daddy, first and foremost, tell us why it's important that parents are consistent with speaking their local languages with their children.
Okay, well, there are a couple of reasons. The crucial thing is that every culture is wrapped up in a language. And throughout the world, there are different cultures, millions of cultures, different cultures. So when parents speak their language, their mother tongue, with their children, it helps to pass on the cultural component of their people. So one reason is the cultural aspect. There is also the issue of identity. Now, we might say, and that's the argument you hear these days, well, the whole world is speaking English anyway, so why bother? But the question is that if you claim you're a Ghanaian or you're an African, but you can't speak any African language, isn't there something wrong with that picture? And if I may tell a little story I heard, and this is something that really happened. So there's these two siblings, a brother and a sister, and at a very early age, they were sent out of Ghana to go into a boarding school outside Ghana. But by the time they left, they had already been in an international school here. So you know the normal thing. They spoke English with a certain non-African accent. So when they went into this other country, one day some of their friends asked the guy, the boy, that, are you sure you're African? He said, yeah, I'm African. I'm from Ghana. He said, really? Because the way you speak English doesn't show to us that you're an African. Okay, if you're an African, can you speak any African language? Anything, say anything in any African language. And the poor guy was stuck. And that's what changed his perspective the rest of his life. Because, yes, we can speak English so we can communicate with the wider world. But we should not leave our languages behind because there's so much cultural information embedded in our languages. Now, it's interesting that these days on social media, when people say things or write things, you find them throwing in some expressions from various Ghanaian languages. So, for example, the ever word la. So people write it and you say it's like, oh, stop that la, and they will write it. Now, how can you express that in English? The meaning of that la, how do you express that in English so that it captures the meaning that anybody who is familiar with that word, any Ewe speaker or any Ghanaian speaker who has grown up and has heard that, even non-Ewes, will use that form as a way of expressing a certain meaning. Or you cry, what's wrong with you? I mean, people write cry so often, even though a lot of times the spelling is wrong. It's supposed to be K-O-R-A-A. Cry, it's not cry. But I see that very often in various places. Yeah, WhatsApp, if I go to other people's websites, I see that. It shows you that there are certain meanings that, nuances of meanings that we can express only by using forms in our languages.
And I realized that there have been so many people who have said it over and over again, and not just Ghanaians, but Nigerians or people of other origins, where it's like, when you say it in English, it doesn't carry the meaning as much as when you say it in your language.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, just a few days ago, I was at a book launch. Professor Dolphine, who is one of the topmost linguists this country has ever produced, launched her autobiography. And the MC was, he said something, and then he asked, how do you translate that into English? So what he said was, you pa. What's you pa in English? That pa that we say in various Ghanaian languages. What is it in English? If you say you pa, how best can you translate it? You can't get it exactly as we have, or the meaning we have in mind when we say it. So there are aspects of our languages that, yeah, you can go on speaking English, but you miss something. You miss some aspect of meaning expression in our languages that you won't get it totally in English. I mean, let's face it. And in any case, if a child is growing up in Ghana and doesn't learn to speak their mother tongue, and so parents are bringing them up in English, look, there is absolutely no way your child can speak English so much so that people would think that he or she is a grandchild of the Queen of England. It's not going to happen. So please, let's get back to our languages.
Okay, now a few weeks ago, I was watching a video on YouTube, and a lady in there she was in the UK, and she was speaking to her nieces in Tree, but they were responding in English. So there was an argument in the comment section where somebody was like, well, isn't it enough that they actually understand the language? I don't like getting into arguments on social media, because then your heart will come. So
you see what she said? Your heart will come. Yeah, you get upset, you get irritated. But when a Gam woman or a Gam man says Echieba, it just shows that the heart has literally jumped out of the body and is on the loose, and you better be careful.
So I was thinking to myself that no, it is not enough that they understand it, because when they grow and they have their kids, how are they going to pass it down to how are they going to pass down the Akan language to them if they can't speak it? Now, I know how it feels like to understand a language and not be able to speak it. I understand Ga, but I struggle to speak it. Now, there's a certain man, my dad's very good friend, who tells me, Mr. Mills, he tells me he doesn't understand English. So I'm always forced to speak the Ga with him. But I don't see myself passing down Ga to Seiram as much as I can pass down the Fanti to him. So it's not enough for them to just understand the language. They need to be able to speak it so that there is continuity. Now, I've heard from some young parents that, oh, we were speaking tree with them, but when they started school, they didn't want to speak it any longer. What can you say to those parents? How can they continue to insist, even when the kids start school and start learning English and speaking English, how to continue speaking the local languages with them and not switching to English?
Okay. Let me say that one of the reasons we have this problem is because of the school system, especially the private school system, not so much the public school system. But the private school system, for some weird reason, expects a child who is, when do they start kindergarten? 4. A child who is 4 years to come to class rattling English like Queen Elizabeth's granddaughter or grandchild or whatever. It's irritating. So because of that, parents feel they must let their children know English before they go to school. Because when they go, they're going to interview them in English, which is nonsense if you ask me. But having said that, when you start speaking, or if the children grow up speaking the language, your language, whatever the language is, Ga, Ebe, Akan, Enzima, Ani, Gurune, Dagbani, Buli, Santro Kofi, Akpafu, Siwu,
Swahili,
Igbo. All these languages I've mentioned are Ghanaian languages. Of course, once you go outside of Ghana, there are thousands of African languages. The thing is that if you are able to start speaking your language with the children, and then they get to the point where you notice that they are not responding anymore because English has come in. Sometimes there is the temptation as parents to feel if we continue, we'll confuse them, especially people who live outside their countries. So if you're living in the UK or US or Canada or wherever, there is that temptation. But the thing is that the brain is very versatile. So once you start with them and they go to school and you think they're trying to switch to English, you just have to be dictatorial at that point. And that's what I did.
I have a story. I'll tell the story.
You just have to be dictatorial. So you have to insist that they speak back to you in the language. You have to insist that you speak to them in the language. You can have English moments. I would grant that. So maybe if you're discussing their homework or something. But under normal circumstances, it's meal time, it's this family fun time. You have to insist. And I know the story you're going to tell me. You go ahead.
I was in class 4 and we were going to church one Sunday morning. Me, Daddy, Mommy, Ebo, my brother. And we had gotten on the Gimpa Road and Ebo asked Daddy a question. And he asked him a question and no response came from Daddy whatsoever. And Daddy was driving. So I remember thinking to myself, did anyone hear the question? Like I heard his question. You see that Daddy didn't hear or his mind was not there. So a few seconds later, Ebo repeated the question. And still silence. I was like, there's no way this man did not hear this question. There's no way this man. But then suddenly, I think right when it dawned on me, also dawned on Ebo that he's supposed to ask the question in fancy. And immediately he asked in fancy, this man responded. So from then on, it was just stuck in our brain that speak fancy. If you don't speak fancy with that, he's not going to answer, and he will let you know. You'll be met with silence. You'll be met with silence.
It's absolutely simple. So at some point, parents just have to insist, and then it also helps when we take children out of our familiar zones into the hometowns, so they can hear the language in its, if you like, quote unquote, authentic form being spoken. It helps. Or among relatives, so when there are family gatherings, chances are that you get quite a number of people speaking the language. So these are all ways in which we can help the children accumulate the language. Now, the point is that the more you speak any language in a certain environment, what happens is that the children, when they hear, they actually accumulate. It's like they build up a database. And I can tell this from my own experience with Ghana. Now, can I tell you? Okay. So I moved to Accra at the age of 16, and all I spoke was Fanti and a bit of English. And then I went to secondary school. I went to Christian Methodist. I call it the school by the gutter, and we are proud of it. Now, if you knew back then, this was a typical Accra school, and there was lots of Ghana. That's where I stayed there for 5 years and did my O level, but I never spoke a word of Ghana. I realized that I was listening, and at some point when the students spoke Ghana, the Ghana students spoke Ghana, I could understand a bit of it. If they said something that I had never heard, I would ask somebody, now what does this mean? I remember very clearly the very first word I asked somebody to tell me, or the very first phrase or clause, more like a clause. Sorry for being technical. I can't help it. That I had, and then the students would say it all the time. And this was Owomilai. So one time I asked somebody, what does that mean? You're upsetting, you're making me angry. Now, so for 5 years, I stayed in that school. I didn't speak Ghana. My mates knew I didn't speak Ghana. And then I went to Augustine's school in Cape Coast for my sixth form. And then I started speaking Ghana.
Mom.
Yes. So what I realized was that for the 5 years that I was at Christian Methodist, I was building a database of Ghana and actually learning Ghana in chunks rather than word by word. So you hear something said very often, a certain sentence, false, said very, and this one, linguists have confirmed it, that languages don't come in single words, they come in chunks or prefabricated forms. So I started speaking Ghana because at Cape Coast, the two main Ghanaian languages were Fanti and Ghana. And most of the students, majority of the students came from Accra anyway, lived in Accra. So we spoke Ghana. Now, later on in life, when I met some of my Christian Methodist student classmates, and they were speaking in Ghana, and I joined in, they turned around and said, when did you learn Ghana? So let's keep exposing the children to the language, and they will pick it. Now, you made a point earlier on which is relevant. So if the children can understand the language, but they can't speak it, well, it's very simple. Those children are not going to pass on the language. There is something in linguistics we call intergenerational transfer. So as soon as there is a break, so if, for example, you don't speak Fanti, or somebody else doesn't speak Nzema or Ebe or Apafu or Lolobi or Dabani, their children are not going to speak it unless they learn it later on from elsewhere. And so guess what? That chain is broken. The chain of transferring the language skills down the generations is broken. So it's very important. It's not just enough to be able to understand it. It helps to learn to speak it. I'm okay if you can't read it personally, even though if you can read the language, that's perfect. So, by the way, this woman taught herself to read Fanti. Trust me, she can read the Fanti Bible. That's where she started from. She started reading Fanti by reading the Fanti Bible. I'm so proud of her.
Thank you. But Daddy, you lived, when we were living in the US, I
Yeah.
was very young, 2 or 1.
When you came to the US, you were 1 year and 3 or 4 months.
And Ebo was almost 3.
Ebo,
Okay,
yeah,
less than 3.
yeah.
So for the time period that we were not living in Ghana and we were that young, and I remember Auntie always used to say people were surprised we were speaking fancy. We were living in the US and we were speaking fancy. How did you ensure that in a foreign land, so this is also to cater to those who are living abroad and they've not been speaking their language with their kids, how did you ensure that we spoke the fancy while living there?
It was the dictatorship.
So enforcing that.
Yes,
fancy
it's just, it's like eating food from home. We know that many Africans, or even people from other cultures, Asians, once they are in the US, they hardly throw away their foods. And I always say that Africans always travel with their foods. So in the same way that you like to fall back on dishes from the homeland, it is the same way that you should work at getting the children to speak the language. So for example, of course, being a linguist gave me a little bit of advantage because I knew what to do to get you guys to speak the language. Now, I remember when you guys came to the US and Ebo started a creche, and he would go and all he spoke was fancy, and he's a 3-year-old boy, and he had friends in the school who would speak English to him. He didn't care. He just spoke his fancy. And I remember one of the teachers came to the house and said, "Oh, can you give us some expressions so that we can, in fancy, that we can use to communicate with him?" Then I told him, "Don't worry, he will be fine." Now, before the academic year was over, everyone was speaking English enough to be understood. And I remember one incident that happened. I don't know if you remember, but you remember Professor Kwesi Yanka, came and visited us in the US. So when he came, you were home, all of you were home. So we were chatting, of course, we were speaking in Fanti. In his mind, you guys didn't speak English. Or even if you spoke it, you didn't speak it very well. And then in the evening, your friends came around. So you were playing in front of the house. Now, of course, you switched on to your American English with all the American accents thrown in. And Prof. Yanka was like, "Hey, Umbi, what's a prof?" Of course, they can speak it, except that inside the house, English wasn't very dominant. There was a family, another African family from another different African country who came. And when the children came, the woman was already there. And then the husband and the children joined her. And she was very concerned that the children, incidentally, they had come from a Francophone country. So they had their indigenous African language as well as French. And now they had to go into an English school. And the woman was concerned that maybe the children were not going to do well. And I told her, "You know what? You should be more concerned about your language that you lose. Because trust me, by the time they finish the academic year, you'll be begging them to speak your language and also French." Oh, you are?
That's what happened.
That's what happened. You know, at some point, they literally lost the African language. They held on to the English because I think they held on to the French. I think also because she put them in a French program, French immersion program. So it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of consistency and drive and determination to insist that you have to speak back to me in English. In the local language that you know, Infanti, or Ebe, or Ga, or Swahili, Igbo, Zulu, Xhosa.
Yoruba. Okay, so one last question. If there's someone watching this and she has a 9-year-old, so because we've had this discussion on a few platforms I'm on. So we have a mother who has an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they've never really spoken the tree with their kids or the gown with their kids, and they feel like, yes, I made a mistake, I should have been speaking with them right from the beginning, but now I want to actually make that effort. How do they start to go about it, and also making sure that the kids speak it back, because some of the kids, of course, they understand but they can't speak it back. So how do they start?
That's a tough question, I must admit. But they need to start from somewhere. So as a family, they should decide, as mother and father or the parent should decide that, look, we're going to switch. We can have times when we'll speak English, but there will be times when we will switch. And just be consistent. Just stay on the long walk in the same direction. And then also maybe introduce the children to, well, these days, I don't know if they are still making the Ghanaian movies in the Ghanaian languages. Kumawood, but not all languages have media productions, so that makes it a little difficult. It might help if they also have the services of a teacher, somebody who might be able to teach the children some of the rudiments of it, and then it's reinforced in the house. Now,
and listening to radio stations.
Well, absolutely.
That also,
I'll make a point about one of the radio stations which revolutionized the use of Ghanaian languages in the media, definitely on radio. But the thing is that if mom and dad are not speaking the language, they shouldn't expect the children to. I know we'll have situations where maybe mother speaks language X and father speaks language Y.
Like Richie and I.
Well, exactly. But in those circumstances, so if you are in that situation where mother speaks a different African language from father speaks a totally different African, trust me, if the two of you consistently decide that, okay, I'm going to speak my language X with the children right from birth. And we shouldn't wait till they are 5 or 6, because by that time the children would have formed their linguistics base. And then father speaks his language, mother speaks her language consistently. By the time they are 6, 7, 8, they would have quite a bit of competence in both languages. Now, anybody who has grown up in a compound house in Ghana or elsewhere on the continent knows that if you grow up in the same house where there are different families with different linguistic repertoires, so in the same house, you have Hausa speaking, you have a Hausa speaking family, you have a Ghana speaking family, you have an Ebe speaking family, Asante speaking family. By the time the kids are 7, 8, they'll be speaking those languages. You'll just keep switching from one language to the other effortlessly. That's one of the things that bilingualism, that the ability to speak more than one language, that it makes our cognitive processes very versatile. The brain, because the brain has to juggle, switch from this to that, and You may be conversing with a friend in English, and then maybe your grandma, who probably doesn't speak English, calls, and then you switch. And it creates certain advantages for the brain. It's almost as if we train, being bilingual helps the brain to be a multitasker. Now, I said something about our languages on radio. Until Peace FM came, literally took the language by storm, the existing FM stations were mostly operating in English. And then they came and they turned the whole country upside down. And even some of them, I'm not going to mention any station, but even some of the well-known stations started having Ghanaian language options. Yes. So, because there are some of the expressions, some of the meanings, you can't get them in English. You pa. How do you say you pa in English?
And you find that a lot on social media when people are typing things. So, and the other thing I wanted to say was that language it's a bonding factor. So you travel outside and then you hear somebody speaking your language, you suddenly get excited. You're like, oh, this is my countryman, and then sometimes through that you make connections with somebody who's from your country. It's like there's a feeling of togetherness when you are in a different country and you're all speaking your language. So I really hope that this video encourages us to be consistent with speaking our local languages with our children, and not only our children, but the children that we meet. So the children of our friends. Don't automatically just switch. You're talking to your friend in tree, and then her kid comes, and then you switch to English with the kid. Be consistent with your nieces and your nephews. Encouraging them also to speak your language with you, so that we don't lose our languages, because it is very possible for languages to go extinct.
Let me cut in here. The point you made about us not losing our language is very crucial. Now, my training is in linguistics, so I know a bit of what is going on with languages. Now, some of us may not be aware that more and more Americans are learning and studying various African languages. Now, if we are not careful, at some future date, maybe in the distant future, they will come and teach us our languages. I mean, I can see, because I had one student in my class. He came from the US. So he joined one of my linguistics classes. The second semester, he didn't come back, but he was still in Ghana. By the time I heard, he had gotten a job working with a company that does the voiceover, the tree voiceover for some of these. Exactly. Because he said, this is where my language, my Akan competence will go up. That's it. Yeah. The following year, another student also came. During the vacation, she decided that she was going to stay in Kumasi because she wanted to really upgrade her spoken tree. So let's be careful. Otherwise, we'll be paying some other people to come and teach our grand and great grandchildren.
That would be very, very unfortunate. Well, and the last point is, I always remember growing up in our schools, there was always the rule of don't speak vernacular when on the school compound. Crazy. Which, when I grew up, I was like, that makes no sense, because that is another way where other people learn, even if their parents are not speaking it with them. That's where they also pick up the languages. So in our own country, we should welcome our languages even in the school. So if that rule still exists, if there's anybody who's connected to GS, please tell them to scrap that rule, because...
But you know that rule operates in other African countries. I mean, I was surprised. I just read an article on that. I won't mention the country's name, but there, in some of the schools, if you spoke vernacular, you were made to wear a sack, a jute, till you met somebody else who was also speaking vernacular, and then you
Pass
it.
it on.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's so shameful. It's just it just shows you that we are very good at degrading ourselves and degrading what we have as Africans, and that should not be.
Okay, guys, so I hope that this was very, very informative and educative. And please share this with as many people as you can, not only parents, but young people coming up and everyone. Let's speak our Ewe, our Fancy, our
It's not Ewe.
Ewe, Ga, Fancy, Swahili, Igbo, Yoruba. Let's speak it with the upcoming generation so that 100 years from now, it will not be said that tree is missing, tree has gone extinct, or Dangbi has gone extinct. Okay, we don't want to hear about that. So, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any video suggestions, if you want to see Daddy of Life on this channel again, just drop your suggestions in the comment section. And if you have any questions as well, drop it. I'm sure he'll be reading. He'll probably come in and answer them for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. Bye.